You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 242 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. We're back over on the other side of the pond today in the US, and we're heading to Georgia to Lily Hill Farm to meet Avery Wrigglesworth. Avery left a career in international finance and moved back to her family's farm in Georgia prevent it from being sold. We'll hear more about this today. She focuses on producing pasture-raised beef cattle, selling beef boxes online. So today we're going to hear more about her business and her story of how and why she returned to the family farm. Avery, welcome to Meet the Farmers. It's good to be back in the States again. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be on the
Oh,
podcast.
let's dive in the usual way. Tell us about your part of Georgia first of all, in terms of the landscape, the kind of farming you have around there.
Yeah, so our farm is located in west central Georgia, and it's kind of right on the border between the Piedmont area and the coastal plains. So we get kind of rolling hills and then some flatter areas. But mostly in my area, you're going to see more ranching type operations. It's a little too hilly to do any crop farming. We have Georgia red clay. We're known for that, and it gets its color from the iron oxide in it. So we have to, one of the things we have to guard against in our operation is getting that clay compacted into dense really, and to prevent erosion. So we focus a lot on maintaining our soil health and really getting that soil really fertile and producing good quality forage for our cattle.
Okay. What's the climate through the year?
So we are a subtropical climate, so we're gonna have very mild winters and then warm, humid summers.
And tell us a little bit more about your farm now, I suppose, in terms of its history and your connection with it.
Yeah, so my grandfather purchased our farm in the 1960s, and one section of it was actually the original Mallory homestead. That Mallory is my maiden name. He purchased that in the 1960s, and then that small section had actually been owned by our family since 1845. So it was kind of interesting for him to repurchase that old homestead and bring it back into the family. And then my dad purchased it from him in the 1990s, and then we moved back in 2019 to run the operation. And we currently lease it from my father, who has the land held in a trust right now between my sisters and myself.
Okay. But what was life growing up on the farm like?
So we mainly spent our weekends out on the farm. So my dad ran it throughout the week, and we would come visit on the weekends. We stayed out here, and we had a house in town. We had a little camp house where we would spend the weekends out here. So I got some exposure to the farming operation on the weekends.
Yeah. But I'm guessing because of how your career started, was farming not your sort of first thought in terms of career?
No, and I don't think my father really wanted to push any of his daughters to pursue the farming operation. I had really high hopes of becoming a ballet dancer, which
Oh,
maybe
really?
wasn't going to.
Okay.
Yep. So I trained in I did American Ballet Theater, summer intensives, Harry Conservatory, and that's kind of an exclusive intensive in Florida. I was very artistic growing up, and I was hoping to, pursue a career in classical ballet, but unfortunately I got some chronic injuries and then also an autoimmune disorder, and my muscle strength just really, I wasn't able to practice at a really high level. So
Wow. And I'm assuming, I mean, that must have been many hours of your childhood taken up by ballet.
Yes. So I mean, I danced every day, but Sunday. And yeah, it was disappointing that it didn't work out, but I think it was for the best. And I think that I obviously ended up kind of headed in a more appropriate direction, and I really found my purpose,
Okay.
oddly enough, in agriculture. So
Yeah. And it's funny how things come round. But before you came back to the farm, let's sort of reflect on that time. You had a career in finance.
yes. So after my career in classical ballet didn't work out, which was like, why don't you take some time to travel? And so I ended up traveling over to the UK and ended up on the island of Jersey.
Oh
Um,
wow. Okay.
so for anyone listening in the US, not New Jersey, Bollywood of Jersey. Um, and that's where I met my now husband. And then once I married him over there is when I started my career in finance because you might be aware it's a offshore finance center.
Oh yes.
And yep, so I ended up going into real estate funds, and we kind of acted as a registered office for a lot of entities over there. So I ended up doing that for 3 years. And then one day we ended up getting a call from my father, and he's like, look, the farm's in forbearance. And Mark's, my husband's name is Mark, his father had actually just recently passed away. And we were thinking, there'd been some mention of us potentially moving back to the States after his dad passed. And my dad, was like, well, the farm's in forbearance. If y'all want to come back and run it, I think it's now or never, or we're going to have to sell it.
Wow.
So we moved back and we invested a lot of our own funds kind of to help get it out of forbearance in short term. And we ran it as a traditional cow calf operation for several years. And we did not even come close to breaking even.
Hmm.
So we were like, this is not going to work. We've got to do something else. So that's when we really made that big transition into the direct to consumer retail beef. And that's kind of how that evolved.
Okay. Gosh, there are quite a few things I want to dig in here. But I mean, first of all, I just want to reflect on that time in Jersey, I suppose, mostly because it's going to be of interest to our UK listeners. And I haven't actually yet had just a shout out to listeners out there. I'd love we've had a farm from the Isle of Man. I haven't yet had any Channel Island farmers, so I'd love to have you on if you want to get in touch. But what were your 3 years in Jersey like in terms of life on the island?
I really enjoyed it. I think if anyone can experience other cultures, I think it's always eye opening, and I think it helps make you a more well rounded person and appreciate things back home more, or things, different lifestyles. I mean, we went and we saw more. I mean, it's so small that you're going to drive past, some of
Yeah.
the potato farms and, see some of the dairy cows out in the pasture. So it was always really interesting for me to see that because, I did have some exposure to agriculture growing up, so I was interested in it. But it was much different. We were much more career focused and like, all right, we work in finance, we walk to work every day and trying to build those sort of careers. I think I was much more short term there, thinking about like day to day and
Yeah.
just kind of building my career in the corporate world. And I was happy, but I wouldn't say I was as fulfilled as I am in agriculture.
And then the coming back to the States, and I suppose that decision making process, and this will be a lot of listeners who have gone through that process of going away and doing something else and then coming back to a family farm will be able to empathize with this. But what was that decision making process like when you were faced with that thought of, well, it's now or never?
Yeah, I think my husband is very good at making decisions and just going for them. I like to overthink things. I think if he hadn't been with me, I would have been like, I don't know, dad, like, I don't know if we can make it work. I don't feel confident in my skills to move back and really run the operation. I think my husband had a big part in that and just really making that decision and saying, I think we need to give it a go. We can always come back. We can always come back and get, our jobs back. in finance. It's not like those skills are going to evaporate from our experience. So I think he really helps me in just like making that decision and jumping in and like it's either going to be gone forever or we can, take this chance and really try to give it a go.
Yeah. And you alluded to it there in terms of a very different new skill set, which could be quite daunting for some people. It's like, how did you find it, sort of, in terms of a skill base, adapting back to running the farm?
To begin with, I mean, I had a superficial knowledge of, cattle farming, but my dad never really included me in like the day-to-day operations or like forage management, cattle health, things like that. And I was very overwhelmed. I'm a perfectionist and I wanted all the cattle to be really fat, really
Yeah.
happy and like, I just there were things that I was like, we got to do this better. Why isn't this perfect? Why isn't this pasture rebounding quick enough? I mean, this was like first 3 months of being
Yeah,
back
yeah.
there, and farming like you can do anything in 3 months almost. Like that's like no time. There's still a lot of things I needed to learn, and a lot of things that I still am learning. But I think it was also just learning to be patient, really studying what's going on around, learning from the actual experiences on the ground. You can read so many documentation, but until you're really, everyone's farm is going to be different in their operations. So I think you just have to be patient with yourself and learn from your particular farm and environment and cattle and genetics.
Yeah.
So
And then fast forwarding to today and how you have the business today, both your sales operation, also your pasture management system, your cattle system as well. What does it look like in terms of your approach, but also your vision for the business?
yeah, so we've kind of transitioned the farm. My dad was very into like these improved forage varieties. Like in the South here, a lot of people plant Bermuda in the pastures, which is a foreign grass that they brought in. I think it's from Africa. The problem is you gotta for our area, you have to fertilize it so heavily to get the pH of our soil where this grass will perform well for you.
Yeah.
Well, we're trying to eliminate all of these external inputs that cost so much money. So we're trying to kind of transition back into more native grasses because our soil just, when you bring in these improved varieties, yeah, then you have to fertilize them and give them the perfect soil fertility for them to grow. But they, without that external input, they may not thrive in your area. So we're kind of trying to transition back to like more native prairie grasses, and we're trying to focus on having to do less external inputs, like including more lagoons into our crops and stuff, so we can get some nitrogen in our soil naturally instead of having to bring in fertilizer. And we're practicing a rotational grazing system, so the cattle get moved every day to fresh pasture, which we aren't grazing as intensively as I would like. I'd like to get our stocking rate up a little bit, but I think I want to cut down the pasture size before I increase the number of head. But I want to get that ratio up a little bit more to really help with the soil fertility and give the grass a little bit more time to bounce back.
I suppose in terms of the lessons that you've learned so far, and comparatively speaking, you've still been on the farm a relatively short amount of time, but you've clearly learned a lot in that time as well. What have been those key lessons that you have learned?
There's been so many lessons, so I'm trying to figure out where to start. But I think that the older generation, they do have a lot of knowledge, but just because this is the way they've always done it doesn't mean that there isn't a better way. So I think it's just figuring out what information to really extract and get guidance from, and then when to really actually look at what's going on and see if there is a better way that you can change the operation and, benefit it financially and as far as the environmental health of it as well.
Let's turn towards the marketing side. And you obviously heavily use social media, and as well, you have a large number of different beef boxes available through your website. Talk about how you built that up and Yeah, how that's been going.
I actually started our social media account before we sold our beef retail, and kind of right before we decided we were going to start selling direct. And I think once I had built up a little bit of a following, we thought, well, maybe we can really do this and use social media to help market our product. And I believe a lot in storytelling and really telling your story and helping, your potential customers, understand the struggles you've had to go through, because I think it does make a difference. And a lot of people are really looking for that sort of connection these days, with a lot of brands that they're purchasing from. They just don't have, you go into a grocery store and stuff and you buy something off the shelf, you just don't have that story behind it, or that connection with, the family producing it. I think it is important to share your story and your struggles and connect, and let people understand, how much work had to go into it. So, and then the website. So Mark is great with computers, so he built the whole website, and I do all of our photography as well.
Great.
So we put that together and we kind of structure our boxes in a way that almost all of them have ground beef. So that helps us move some of that ground beef product in addition to those really popular premium cuts. And then some of them are kind of based more off of what I think customers are wanting and looking for. So
Yeah, I was going to say on that, who are your particular customers, and what's the most popular in terms of cuts? What are people looking for?
I think really just someone who is conscientious of where their food's coming from, wanting to know how it was produced, where and by whom, and also just someone who's wanting to support, smaller, more family-run businesses. Our ground beef actually is very, very popular, and I try to keep that price, as low as we kind of can, because I think it's a really good, anyone can buy ground beef and feed there's so many meals you can make from it. And but our steaks are generally very, very popular, and it depends seasonally. Roast in the winter, in the summertime, I have to get creative. Like sometimes I'll get kebab meat cut out of the
Yeah,
some of the roast, and chuck. I'll try to get some chuck eye steak. You kind of have to get creative with that, to make sure, because people just aren't cooking, roast that much in the summertime. But it does vary seasonally, and around Christmas and stuff, we try to do prime ribs, because everyone loves to do that for New Year's or Christmas.
yeah. I was going to say it's
So.
making me hungry already. Um, we're going to move on to the part of the show where we talk about general challenges, and this is usually quite different depending on the farmer that I speak to. But what for you, and this could be you as a specific farm business, it could be you reflecting on the industry in general, or perhaps even being in a rural area in general. What's the biggest challenge for you in farming at the moment?
I think it's really juggling the farming operation and the retail beef operation, because we have one full-time employee on the farm, then it's myself, Mark, and we have one other employee to help with fulfillment. The farming operation is full-time. There's so many things. My challenge is not being able to be everywhere at once and do everything.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
it's really hard, and sometimes it's hard with customers, like, I have a day that, we have to do some cattle work. We gotta, get the herd up, do some pregnancy checks and other things like that. And that'll be a full day. And we might have some customers that call. No one's there at the office to answer the phone, or, emails come in about orders, and, we'll go back to them at the end of the day. But I think we're out there working, but it's hard to juggle the retail and then also the farming operation. So it's really almost like two separate businesses, to be honest.
No, for sure. That constant juggle. But in terms of the opportunity, I'm assuming you're pretty positive about things going forward. What are the opportunities for you as a business?
We really want to at least be able to purchase some small section of the farm. And then we feel like we'll have a lot more opportunities that will be able to open up for us. We'd love to do a storefront. And that way we can kind of build up our local customer base a little bit more. But I think that we're going to have plenty of opportunities no matter what direction we go in.
Meet the Farmers is brought to you by RuralPod Media, the only podcast production agency to specialize in the rural sector. We're on a mission to make rural stories mainstream and help businesses, organizations, and communities like you tell your story through podcasting. Podcasting is a fantastic way of connecting with your audience, whoever that might be, getting your message out there and networking with leaders in your niche. RuralPod Media can help you by launching your new podcast or helping you with the technical side. We also provide podcast training and an audit service if you already have a podcast. You're not sure where to take it to next. For more information or to book a call, visit ruralpodmedia.co.uk. That's ruralpodmedia.co.uk. Things on a farm are always slightly up in the air, but your sort of ideal vision for the farm, what would it look like?
Yeah, so I really want to get it to a really stable place as far as profitability. And when the next generation comes along, I want to be able to pass down an asset that is stable, profitable, and running smoothly, you know. So I want that for really the future. Just the next generation not have to go through kind of the struggles we've been through.
We'll move on to the quick questions, which have absolutely nothing to do with farming, but be interested in what your responses are. First is, if you could instantly become an expert in anything, what would it be and why?
Well, I immediately took this one and made it about farming.
Very good.
So, animal nutrition and forage specialist. That's something that I really struggle with. You know, I'm always like, are our cattle getting everything they need? You know, so I would love to just have that knowledge at my fingertips. You know, some of our cows were licking some of the dirt, and I was like, oh my God, what are they deficient in? Why are they doing this? You know, and then our nutritionist, where we source our feed from, was like, they probably just need more roughage. They're fine. Like, okay.
I think it's like all those things, isn't it? It comes over time. Like
Yeah.
you will pick everything up over time, won't you? The next one is, well, what is your favorite thing to do to relax?
I don't like to relax.
It's such
Relaxing
it's such a
gives me
common answer for
anxiety.
farmers.
I hate vacations. I can't do them. I'm a nervous wreck. My husband can, and he's like, I gotta get you off this place. I'm like, no, don't. I prefer to be working.
Were you like that before the farm as well? Was this something that's you've become as you came onto the farm?
No, I think that I have a little bit of I don't want to call it a personality disorder, but I'm like very intense about things that I choose to do. So it's like all or nothing. And it just like, it becomes like my whole being in a way. I'm like,
Yeah.
you know, very dedicated to the purpose and the project that I'm working on.
So this one is probably let's go for it. If you could travel anywhere in the world, where would it be and why? And this would be
Egypt.
on the basis of that the farm is fine, everything's going to be fine. You can go there regardless.
Egypt is actually a place I would really like to go.
Okay.
We've been watching quite a few documentaries kind of about that area, and I think it'd be really interesting to go through the Nile and see. It's just a completely different terrain, and you know, there's like the little farms right along the Nile, and then the desert. So I think it'd be a really interesting place to visit.
Get a trip
Yeah,
booked, get some cover for the farm, and get a trip
I know.
booked.
Mark's like, we're gonna do it one day.
And Avery, the final questions. The first is, if you had a message for the public, any message, what would it be?
I think that we need to be conscious of where our food system is going. It's becoming very centralized, which, you know, it's very efficient. And I think that there is a place for it. But I think that we always need to make sure that we do have these other options, these direct to consumer type operations. So I think it's just a matter of, you know, being knowledgeable about our food industry, where you're sourcing your food, and if it does matter to you, seeking out, you know, direct to consumer farming and ranching operations.
And your message to farmers.
If it's not working, change it. So for us, like we can complain about the markets and the cattle industry and the government and all this sort of stuff. But, for us, we just saw we weren't going to make it as a traditional cow calf operation selling our cattle at auction. So not everyone will have the ability to do it, but I think that we can push ourselves and change operations if they aren't profitable. Be creative, look at, different ways you can change your business model. Don't just keep doing it and complaining that you're not getting enough for your animals when there are other options and routes you can take.
Yeah, I think that idea about being creative and thinking outside the box, it's something that comes up a lot, and I think it's something that certainly farmers of all types, wherever you are in the world, it's something that's going to become more important. Avery, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's for anyone who's interested. How do they follow you on socials? Where do they go?
Lily Hill Cattle. So we're on Instagram at Lily Hill Cattle and TikTok and Facebook as well. And I'm just trying to figure out the whole X Twitter universe. And then our website is lilyhillcattle.com as well.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for giving us an insight into your business and your journey into it. Yeah, I hope that your story has inspired a few people. I'm sure it will have done. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. We'll leave it there. That is it for today. But a big thank you to my guest, Avery Wrigglesworth, for coming on the show. Thank you also for listening. Please do share this episode on your socials and tell someone you know about the podcast. Next time, I'll have a special episode for you coming from the Cultivate Conference, which is being produced jointly with our sister show, Rural Business Focus. I'll be back with you next week. But for now, I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers, and thank you very much for listening.